wanted to help with this blog post by introducing some video in this account of the background to the book. I didn't know what I wanted to write. Well, there's a surprise. But I knew there was something in there, and it's like a sculptor with a block of rock. So without really realizing this was what I was doing, I didn't know I was sculpting something out of a block of rock, but I enrolled to do a part-time PhD and did it between 1997 and 2004 while doing the day job. So I lost my lunch times really, but have gained a book. And it turned out to be how to write being. So I'm going to explain this a bit. It may sound a bit puzzling. So there are loads of intellectual books which stay in the realm of thinking and theory. I knew that the book I wanted to write needed to have some of that, but definitely not all of it. It'd be really boring. And what I was writing about was not at all boring. And there are loads of books which are practical and about doing. And again, I wanted some of that because pretty well all my working life has been about doing. It's also been about thinking. But I didn't want it to be the whole of the book. And what I was reflecting was that all of my working life, I've not just been doing or just thinking, or just the two of those, but my work has also been about my being. People in Britain want to be the person they know they can be. I mean, there are people building new lives in all sorts of ways all over the place. This is about being. So I wanted a book that included stories about becoming somebody different because you changed something about yourself. And I couldn't write about potential with only thinking and doing. Being had to be there. But of course, at that stage, I didn't know I was writing about potential. So my PhD taught me how to get being into what turned out to be the book. And for 5 years after the PhD, I tested out what I'd learned by writing papers for the more experimental types of social science conferences, and it worked. I was onto something. And I retired from the full-time day job in March 2012, and I tried to forget about writing a book. I mean, I just worked full-time for 40 years. Give me a break. But I couldn't leave it alone. It kept bugging me. So between 2013 and 2015, I experimented. I made a start. And I did it with podcasting and write-ups of my 40 years of community work through a website under the heading of Communities Are Connected. And it's at this point that I realised I had to find the bigger story lurking in all that field work. You know, the work in the 70s on the council estates, that definitely had a bigger story of where Britain was in the 70s. The anti-racist work in the 80s, that also had a bigger story about Britain in that decade. So too for the 90s and the noughties. But what was the bigger story? What was I gonna hang everything on? And also, what was going to hang everything on that would actually be of genuine interest to quite a wide range of people? Because if you produce a book about community development fieldwork, it's not going to be read by vast numbers of people. So what having the podcasts and the website did was get me to write far more broadly about Britain today and in the past. So in 2015, I was talking with another friend in Leeds over a meal, and he kept asking me about what I was writing about. And I came out with, so it's a voice of the time. And he said, I think you might have a book title. During 2016, I started writing in earnest, and Voice of the Time turned into a 2-part text experimenting with past, present and future and Britain. Part 1 was the past. I wrote especially a chapter about each of the 70s, 80s, 90s and noughties. Part 1 concluded with what we could learn. Part 2 covered Britain today, and for the future I used the concept of changing the zeitgeist. You know, this is a German word for a point in time when a country really dramatically changes. Everything changes. The zeitgeist changes. Now, I don't particularly like that kind of phrase, and I didn't think I was going to end up using it, that word zeitgeist. But I nevertheless had to have something that encapsulated the ability to change Britain out of the current kind of mess that it's in. So I knew it didn't work as a book, but it was a start. You have to start somewhere. As I haven't finished the beginning yet. This is not the end of the beginning. By now, a lot of people were asking what the book was about, and I found myself saying I thought Britain was a country with the most enormous potential. The P word. But that it wasn't being realised. And every single person emphatically agreed. It wasn't just a kind of, oh yeah, it was, oh yes, I really agree with that. And I thought, well, if that's the reaction I'm getting using this word potential and this kind of understanding, perhaps I'm onto something here. In January 2017, I started reworking Voice of the Time into a structure of where we are, where we were, and where we could be. And I ditched the word zeitgeist. Now, during 2 rewrites in 2017, this eventually turned into 16 chapters and 220,000 words. Clearly unpublishable. But I could finally see there's a book in here. The block of stone I'd started with had been severely chiseled and hidden in the shape that had appeared was something really wonderful that I could not have discovered in any other way, I don't think. This was a very exciting moment of true discovery. Another friend was helping with some editing and suggested The Britain Potential as a title. Ping! Now that's a title. And that's what I've gone with, because that's what the book has turned out to be about. So 2018 was the year The Britain Potential was written. The sculpture finally got chiseled out. I had material to draw from with all the previous work, and I could now see that past, present and future really would not work. And I hunted around for something solid thematically that could run right through it. And I found it in Frederick Laloux's Reinventing Organizations. His thematic glue, if you like, is Ken Wilber's color-coded consciousnesses. You know, that some people have a red consciousness, some people have an amber consciousness, some people have an orange consciousness, for some people it's green, and for some people it's teal. And this gave me a really, really strong conceptual thematic to run right through and tie everything together in the book. So that, and by the way, all those color-coded consciousnesses are explained in the book. That and the concept of Britain having an operating system, which I pinched from Brian Robertson's book on holacracy. I've referenced that. It's not plagiarism. In both cases, in both Ken Wilber's case and Brian Robertson's case, I think these are fantastic understandings which I've put to practical use in this book about Britain. So this helped me to rework the structure, and I could see I could put the previous work in a much shorter form in 9 chapters. Oh, by the way, the thing about the operating system is that when that changes, that ripples through to everything else in the society. And I thought that was a better way of talking about it than using the concept of the zeitgeist, which was still quite vague and general. Operating system has allowed me to get very specific about the state, business, and civil society, the power relationships between those three, and the kind of consciousness, political consciousness, that is driving those power relationships between those three. That makes up an operating system of Britain. And when that changes, that ripples through into all of the different aspects of society. And I've introduced a third thing, which is a living ecology of support for realizing potential, as another theme to tie everything together. So, you know, if we're going to realize potential, certainly consciousness, whether we've got a red, amber, orange, green, or teal consciousness really, really makes a big difference. But also there's a practical element, which is what kind of support are we getting from other people? So the self, developing the self, the support we can get within family and friends, in communities and networks, even within organization, and even the politics of the country has a bearing on that level, that kind of practical support we can get as an individual to realize our potential. So those chapters are fronted up by a first chapter on potential and consciousness. And you can imagine what's in there. A second one on Britain today. And then at the other end of the book, we've got sort of specialist chapters, if you like, on our history from the Industrial Revolution to welfare state Britain to market-orientated Britain. So we can really clearly see three operating systems and how they changed. And then a section on public services, because it's pretty clear to me that they play a decisive role in enabling our country to move on from market thinking. And then the last chapter tied everything together as Civil Society Britain. So we have a 9-chapter book of around 75,000 words, and it has proved to be publishable. The finished sculpture has finally appeared in the world. Thanks for listening to this. Sorry it's gone on a bit.